This is an audio recording of the book You'll Get Through This by Max Lucado, recorded by Mo Sena. Chapter 5. Oh, so this is boot camp. On November 28, 1965, the fighter plane of Howard Rutledge exploded under enemy fire. He parachuted into the hands of the North Vietnamese Army and was promptly placed in the Heartbreak Hotel, one of the prisons in Hanoi. When the door slammed and the key turned in that rusty iron lock, a feeling of utter loneliness swept over me. I lay down on that cold cement slab in my 6x6 prison. The smell of human excrement burned my nostrils. A rat, large as a small cat, scampered across the slab beside me. The walls and floors and ceilings were caked with filth. Bars covered a tiny window high above the door. I was cold and hungry. My body ached from the swollen joints and sprained muscles. It's hard to describe what solitary confinement can do to a nerve and defeat a man. You'll quickly tire of standing up or sitting down, sleeping or being awake. There are no books, no paper or pencils, no magazines or newspapers. The only colors you see are drab gray and dirty brown. Months or years may go by when you don't see the sunrise or the moon, green grass or flowers. You are locked in, alone and silent, in your filthy little cell, breathing stale, rotten air, and trying to keep your sanity. Few of us will ever face the austere conditions of a POW camp. Yet, to one degree or another, we will spend time behind bars. My mail today contains a prayer request for a young mother just diagnosed with lupus, incarcerated by bad health. I had coffee yesterday with a man whose wife battles depression. He feels stuck, chain number 1, and guilty for feeling stuck, chain number 2. After half a century of marriage, a friend's wife began to lose her memory. He had to take away her car keys so she wouldn't drive. He has to stay near so she won't fall. They had hopes of growing old together. They still may, but only one of them will know the day of the week. Each of these individuals wonders, where is heaven in this story? Why would God permit such imprisonment? Does this struggle serve any purpose? Joseph surely posed those questions. If Mrs. Potiphar couldn't flirt Joseph into her bed, she would force him. She grabbed for his robe, and he let her have it. He chose his character over his coat. When he ran, she concocted a story. When Potiphar came home, she was ready with her lie and Joseph's coat as proof. Potiphar charged Joseph with sexual assault and locked him in jail. And Joseph was there in the prison. But the Lord was with Joseph and showed him mercy, and he gave him favor in the sight of the keeper of the prison. Genesis 39:20-21. Not a prison in the modern sense, but a warren of underground, windowless rooms with damp floors, stale food, and bitter water. Guards shoved him into the dungeon and slammed the door. Joseph leaned back against the wall, slid to the floor. I have done nothing here that they should put me into the dungeon. 40, verse 15. Joseph had done his best in Potiphar's house. He had made a fortune for his employer. He had kept his chores done and his room tidy. He had adapted to a new culture. He had resisted sexual advances. But how was he rewarded? A prison sentence with no hope of parole. Since when does the high road lead over a cliff? The answer? Ever since the events of Genesis 3, the chapter that documents the entry of evil into the world, disaster came in the form of Lucifer, the fallen angel. And as long as Satan prowls around like a roaring lion, roar, 1 Peter 5:8, he will wreak havoc among God's people. He will lock preachers like Paul in prisons. He will exile pastors like John on remote islands. He will afflict the friends of Jesus like Lazarus with diseases. But his strategies always backfire. The imprisoned Paul wrote epistles. The banished John saw heaven. The cemetery of Lazarus became a stage upon which Christ performed one of the greatest miracles. Intended evil becomes ultimate good. As I reread that promise, it sounds formulaic, catchy, as if destined for a bumper sticker. I don't mean for it to. There is nothing trite about your wheelchair, empty pantry, or aching heart. These are uphill, into the wind challenges you are facing. They are not easy, but neither are they random. God is not sometimes sovereign. He is not occasionally victorious. He does not occupy the throne one day and vacate it the next. The Lord shall not turn back until he has executed and accomplished the thoughts and intents of his mind. Jeremiah 30, verse 24. This season in which you find yourself may puzzle you, but it does not bewilder God. He can and will use it for his purpose. Case in point, Joseph is in prison. From an earthly viewpoint, the Egyptian jail was the tragic conclusion of Joseph's life. Satan could chalk up a victory for the dark side. Check. All plans to use Joseph ended with the slamming of the jail door. The devil had Joseph just where he wanted him. So did God. There in the prison, they bruised Joseph's feet with fetters and placed his neck in an iron collar until the time came to fulfill his word. The Lord tested Joseph's character. Psalm 105, verses 18, 19. What Satan intended for evil, God used for testing. In the Bible, a test is an external trial that purifies and prepares the heart. Just as a fire refines precious metal from dross and impurities, a trial purges the heart of the same. One of the psalmists wrote, "For you, O God, tested us. You refined us like silver. You brought us into prison and laid burdens on our backs. You let men ride over our heads. We went through fire and water, but you brought us to a place of abundance." Psalm 66, 10, 12. Every day God tests us through people, pain, or problems. Stop and consider your circumstances. Can you identify the tests of today? Snarling traffic, threatening weather, aching joints. If you see your troubles as nothing more than isolated hassles and hurts, you'll grow bitter and angry. Yet, if you see your troubles as tests used by God for his glory and your maturity, then even the smallest incidents take on significance. A couple of days ago, my Saturday afternoon turned into a tough test. Danilyn and I had a disagreement. We had agreed to sell our house, but we couldn't agree on a realtor. I had my opinion, and she had hers. Back and forth we went, neither able to convince the other. A pleasant day turned sour. She retreated into her corner, and I into mine. We have Saturday worship services at our church. When the time came for me to leave and preach, I gave Danilyn a perfunctory goodbye and walked out the door to do God's work. "We'll deal with this later," I told her. But God wanted to deal with me immediately. The distance between my house and the church building is only a 5-minute drive, but that is all it took for God to prick my conscience with the truth. "Shouldn't you be at peace with your wife before you preach to my church?" It was a test. Would I pout or apologize? Would I ignore the tension or deal with it? I can't say I always pass the tests, but that day I did with flying colors. Before the service began, I called Danilyn, apologized for my stubbornness, and asked for her forgiveness. Later that night, we reached a decision on a realtor, prayed together, and put the matter to rest. Each day has a pop quiz, and some seasons are final exams, brutal, sudden pitfalls of stress, sickness, or sadness. Like Joseph, you did your best. Like Joseph, your best was rewarded with incarceration. What is the purpose of the test? Why didn't God keep Joseph out of prison? Might this be the answer? For when your faith is tested, your endurance has a chance to grow. So let it grow, for when your endurance is fully developed, you will be strong in character and ready for anything. James 1, 3, and 4. As a boy, Joseph was prone to softness. Jacob indulged him, spoiled him. Joseph talked about his dreams and grand ambitions, a bit too full of himself, perhaps. Even in Potiphar's home, Joseph was the darling of the estate. Quickly promoted, often noticed. Success came easily. Perhaps pride did as well. If so, a prison term would purge that. God knew the challenges that lay ahead, and he used Joseph's time in prison to strengthen his servant. And the keeper of the prison committed to Joseph's hand all the prisoners who were in the prison. Whatever they did there, it was his doing. Genesis 39, verse 22. Talk about a crash course in leadership. Joseph managed willing servants for Potiphar, but in prison he was assigned unruly, disrespectful, and ungrateful man. Joseph could have cloistered himself in a corner and mumbled, "I've learned my lesson. I'm not running anything for anybody." But he didn't complain, didn't criticize. He displayed a willing spirit with the prisoners. He was especially kind to a butler and a baker. The butler and the baker, both officers of Pharaoh, were placed in Joseph's care. One morning he noticed deep frowns on their faces. He could have dismissed their expressions. What concern was their sorrow to him? Who cared if they were sullen or bitter? Joseph, however, took an interest in them. In fact, the first recorded words of Joseph in the prison were kind ones. "Why do you look so sad?" Genesis 40, verse 7. Abandoned by his brothers, sold into slavery, and unjustly imprisoned, Joseph was still tender toward others. Wouldn't compassion be a suitable quality for the soon-to-be director of a worldwide hunger relief program? God wasn't finished. Both the baker and the butler were troubled by dreams. In his dream, the butler saw a vine with 3 grape-bearing branches. He pressed the grapes into Pharaoh's cup and gave it to the king. The baker dreamed about bread. 3 baskets were on his head, and birds ate the bread in the top basket. Both men sought the counsel of Joseph, and Joseph received an interpretation from God. Would he share it? The last time Joseph spoke of dreams, he ended up in a dry cistern. Besides, only 50% of his revelation was good news. Could Joseph be trusted to share God's news? If called to stand before Pharaoh, would Joseph accurately convey God's word? This was a test. Joseph passed it. He gave the butler good news. "You'll be out in 3 days." And the baker, bad news. "You'll be dead in 3 days." One would get a new start, the other a noose around the neck. Test, test, test. The dungeon looked like a prison, smelled like a prison, sounded like a prison. But had you asked the angels of heaven about Joseph's location, they would have replied, "Oh, he is in boot camp." This chapter in your life looks like rehab, smells like unemployment, sounds like a hospital. But ask the angels, "Oh, she is in training," or "he is in training." God hasn't forgotten you, just the opposite. He has chosen to train you. The Hebrew word for test comes from a word that means to take a keen look at, to look, to choose. Dismiss the notion that God does not see your struggle. On the contrary, God is fully engaged. He sees the needs of tomorrow and accordingly uses your circumstances to create the test of today. Does he not have the authority to do so? He is the potter. We are the clay. He is the shepherd. We are the sheep. He is the gardener. We are the branches. He is the teacher. We are the students. Trust his training. You'll get through this. If God can make a prince out of a prisoner, don't you think he can make something good out of your mess? Remember, all tests are temporary. They are limited in duration. In this you greatly rejoice, though now for a little while you may have had to suffer grief in all kinds of trials. 1 Peter 1:6. Tests never last forever, because this life doesn't last forever. We were born but yesterday. Our days on earth are as transient as a shadow. Some tests end on earth, but all tests will end in heaven. In the meantime, follow the example of Joseph. Let God train you. He is watching the way you handle the little jobs. If you are faithful with a few matters, he will set you over many. Matthew 25:21. Joseph succeeded in the kitchen and dungeon before he succeeded in the court. He cared for the butler and baker before he cared for the nations. The reward of good work is greater work. Do you aspire to great things? Excel in the small things. Show up on time. Finish your work early. Don't complain. Let others grumble in the corner of the prison cell. Not you. You know how God shapes his servants. Today's prisoner may become tomorrow's prime minister. When you are given a task, take it on. When you see a hurt, address it. What if Joseph had ignored the sadness on the faces of Pharaoh's officers? What if he had focused on his needs and ignored theirs? Would God still have liberated him from prison? We don't know, but we know this. The kindness of Joseph opened the door of the jail because the baker introduced Joseph to Pharaoh. Compassion matters to God. This is the time for service, not self-centeredness. Cancel the pity party. Love the people God brings to you. And share the message God gives to you. This test will become your testimony. God comes alongside us when we go through hard times, and before you know it, he brings us alongside someone else who is going through hard times so that we can be there for that person, just as God was there for us. Said 2 Corinthians 1:4. You didn't sign up for this crash course in single parenting or caring for a disabled spouse, did you? No. God enrolled you. He has taken the intended evil and rewoven it into his curriculum. Why? So you can teach others what he has taught you. Your mess can become your message. I like the conversation Bob Benson recounts in his book, See You at the House. One of his friends had a heart attack. Although at first the friend wasn't sure he'd survive, he did recover. Months after the surgery, Bob asked him, "Well, how did you like your heart attack?" "It scared me to death. Almost." "Would you like to do it again?" "No." "Would you recommend it?" "Definitely not." "Does your life mean more to you now than it did before?" "Well, yes." "You and Nell have always had a beautiful marriage, but are you closer now than ever?" "Yes." "How about that new granddaughter?" "Yes. Did I show you her picture?" "Do you have a new compassion for people? A deeper understanding and sympathy?" "Yes." "Do you know the Lord in a deeper, richer fellowship than you had ever realized could be possible?" "Yes." How did you like your heart attack? Rather than say, "God, why?" ask, "God, what? What can I learn from this experience?" Remember today what you have learned about the Lord through your experiences with him. Deuteronomy 11:2. Rather than ask God to change your circumstances, ask him to use your circumstances to change you. Life is a required course. Might as well do your best to pass it. God is at work in each of us, whether you know it or not, whether we want it or not. He takes no pleasure in making life hard, in throwing roadblocks in the way. Lamentations 3:33. He does not relish our sufferings, but he delights in our development. God began doing a good work in you, and I am sure he will continue it until it is finished when Jesus Christ comes again. Philippians 1:6. He will not fail. He cannot fail. He will work in us what is pleasing to him. Hebrews 13:21. Every challenge, large or small, can equip you for a future opportunity. Howard Rutledge came to appreciate this time as a POW in Vietnam. He wrote, "During those long periods of enforced reflection, it became so much easier to separate the important from the trivial, the worthwhile from the waste. My hunger for spiritual food soon outdid my hunger for steak. I wanted to know about the part of me that will never die. I wanted to talk about God and Christ and the church. It took prison to show me how empty life is without God." On August 31st, after 20 days of torture, I could remember I had children, but not how many. I said Phyllis's name over and over again so I would not forget. I prayed for strength. It was on the 28th night I made God a promise. If I survived this ordeal, the first Sunday back in freedom, I would take Phyllis and my family to their church and confess my faith in Christ and join the church. This wasn't a deal with God to get me through that last miserable night. It was a promise made after months of thought. It took prison and hours of painful reflection to realize how much I needed God and the community of believers. After I made God that promise, again I prayed for strength to make it through the night. When the morning dawned through the crack in the bottom of that solid prison door, I thanked God for His mercy. Don't see your struggle as an interruption to life, but as preparation for life. No one said the road would be easy or painless, but God will use this mess for something good. This trouble you're in isn't punishment. It's training, the normal experience of children. God is doing what is best for us, training us to live God's holy best. Hebrews 12, verses 8 and 10. This is Mo Sena for audiobook recording of You'll Get Through This by Max Lucado, Chapter 5. So, this is boot camp. Thank you for listening.